Hello again, everyone. I'm Father Joe Nazzle from Sonino Mission House in Berkeley. For almost a year now, we've been sheltering in place and trying to stay safe to stop the spread of COVID-19. The feelings of isolation and pandemic fatigue have certainly surfaced for many of us as we've experienced the proverbial walls closing in on us. If we have tested positive for the coronavirus and been in quarantine, we know the feelings of isolation and of being set apart from others. Now, if you take those feelings of isolation and abandonment beyond the 14-day quarantine or even the 11-month sheltering in place that many of us have experienced and make them a way of life, well, then you can begin to sense what the leper in today's gospel was experiencing. The closest I've ever felt to feeling abandonment that the leper in the gospel experienced was way back in grade school when I had the mumps. I was in quarantine and recovered. But a few days after I was cleared to rejoin my friends, one of my best friends had a birthday party, and because I was no longer contagious, I was planning to go to the party. But my friend's mom called my mom and told her, just to be on the safe side, it would be better if I didn't come to the party. And I remember the feeling of being left out, of being isolated. Well, that was the experience that the leper had every day of his life. Because of the contagious nature of the disease, the leper had to live apart from his family and his community and society in general. He was supposed to shout if anyone came near him as a warning that he was a leper. But here he is the one who is approaching Jesus and kneels down to beg Jesus to heal him. The isolation had become too much. He couldn't stand being apart anymore. If you wish, he prays, you can make me clean. Because of the stigma leprosy carried, a stigma that was both social and moral, because remember, the prevailing theology at the time was that the person must have been a great sinner, a terrible sinner, for God to punish him with such a hideous disease. The first impulse would be to back away. But Jesus is moved by the plight of the leper, and he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, I do will it. Be clean. The illness of leprosy with its physical deformity was terrible enough, but the stigma and the loneliness that ensued made it even worse. But Jesus didn't back away or keep his distance. He did not desire that this man should suffer alone. He doesn't desire that we should suffer in isolation and fear. Rather, he chooses to heal the man so he can return to his family and his community of faith. Jesus tells the man to show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them. Now, Jesus was emphatic on this point. Mark says he warns him sternly. Jesus knew that this man had to show himself to the priest to erase the moral stigma that had banished him from the community. But the man doesn't follow Jesus' warning. He must have been a publicist or in public relations before the leprosy had isolated him, because he began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad so that it became impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He became Jesus' PR man, spreading the good news of his healing. You remember last week we heard Jesus heal Peter's mother-in-law, and she immediately began to serve them, really becoming the first deacon in Mark's gospel. So this man, healed of leprosy, becomes the first missionary and evangelist. He's so open and so vocal about telling the story of how Jesus healed him that it is Jesus who ends up on the outside. So in healing the leper, Jesus becomes the leper in a sense. He takes the man's leprosy upon himself, exchanging places with him. And the result is that people who heard the former leper's testimony flocked to the fringe to see Jesus, coming to him from everywhere. Reflecting on Jesus' encounter with the leper several years ago during a Sunday Eucharist, when he installed 7 new cardinals for the church, Pope Francis said this story illuminated 3 key concepts that we must embrace as an institution to be missionary disciples in the world: the compassion of Jesus, concern for those in the margins, and reinstating those who have been marginalized to the community. The Pope reminded us that the word compassion literally means to suffer with another person. Jesus doesn't hold back here, Francis said. Instead, he gets involved in people's pain and their need for the simple reason that he knows and wants to show compassion. Francis underscored that when Jesus healed the leper, he placed himself outside the camp. He took upon himself the marginalization. When Jesus stretched out his hand to that leper, Pope Francis says, he reinstates the marginalized. And he told the worldwide institution that we will not find the Lord unless we truly accept the marginalized. The gospel of the marginalized, Francis said, is where our credibility is at stake. This is where it's discovered, and this is where it is revealed. There's really something in this story about how we stand in the gaps that exist today in our world and in our faith communities, between the insiders and the outsiders, the rich and the poor, those who are in positions of power, and those who feel uninvited or unwelcome or unwanted. When Jesus stretches out his hand to touch the leper, he was standing in the chasm. And it was really a foreshadowing of his cross that would be the ultimate bridge between heaven and earth. When Pope Francis stated so bluntly that the church's credibility depends on how we treat those in the margins, this story of Jesus' encounter with the leper is an invitation for missionary disciples to stand in the gaps that exist in our society and in our faith communities, between the institution and those who feel unwelcome or uninvited or unwanted. And by sending that man with leprosy, the man he heals of leprosy, to show himself to the priest, Jesus is trying to stretch the institution at that time, the institution's imagination about who is welcome in the community of faith. You know, in this time in our history when we're so polarized, too often we try to change the minds of those with whom we disagree. We try to win them over to our side. Or if we know we can't win the argument, at least we try to help them see that our point of view, or why our point of view, is the correct one and makes more sense than theirs. But even though Jesus in Mark's gospel was in constant conflict with the religious leaders of the day, he wasn't interested in winning an argument. He was focused on restoring all people to God. And it's this relationship with those who are on the outside, those who are pushed to the margins of life, symbolized by the man with leprosy, that moved Jesus to compassion and motivated his mission of mercy that included everyone. May we be so motivated to be missionaries of mercy and compassion today. So happy Valentine's Day, and maybe today send a Valentine prayer, not just to those you love the most, but maybe one of those you find most difficult to love. Stay safe, take good care as we continue to meet in prayer.